Hello, popcorn junkies. Sorry for the delay in getting this review to you. Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, a few caveats from the get-go. I like a good superhero film. I like it as a genre. And I've liked Deadpool. He's the sort of anti-hero. He's the hero, but he's the one that breaks the rules. It's Ryan Reynolds. I mean, what not to like? So he's inherently funny. Enjoyed Deadpool. Enjoyed Deadpool 2. I have to confess, going into this, having watched all the trailers, I haven't been an enormous fan of Wolverine. The X-Men really didn't get me. I always found the X-Men somewhat sort of camp they were meant to be. What I like about comics and superheroes and stuff like that is where they intersect with real world emotions or real world stuff, right down to even in something like Spider-Man. For me, the real world thing is, yes, it's like Gotham and it's kind of like New York, so we recognize the space. But like Spider-Man is about a teenage boy kind of coming to terms with superpowers, which is quite a neat metaphor. That's kind of real life, isn't it? Batman is a man who's really dealing with grief and all the darkness of depression and mental health issues. So I'm interested in all that. And Deadpool's an interesting character. He's the kind of loose cannon in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, this film comes along. It's the only film that's been released by Marvel this year. I think that's a good move. Kevin Feige, if you don't know who Kevin Feige is, he's a man who's head of Marvel. And at San Diego Comic-Con in the last 24, 48 hours, they've made big announcements that have kind of turned upside down the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Things like announcing that the Russo brothers are back to direct the next two Avengers films because of the Jonathan Majors screw up. I'm kind of agnostic on the Russo brothers. I know they made the Avengers films and they were multi-billion, double-billion dollar grossing films and are considered hugely successful, etc., and they are. But I do worry that we're looking at the Russo brothers through rose-tinted glasses. We're thinking they're the saviour, when in fact they were making films at a very different time. Just because we bring them in now. And I don't think they've had much success with any of the things they've done in between either. Bigger news than that is that Robert Downey Jr. is coming back to the MCU as Doctor Doom. Lots of people unhappy about that. Can you bring Robert Downey Jr. back as an arch villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe when he's played an superhero of the stature of Iron Man? But Marvel is in crisis. Superhero films are in crisis. A lot of hope is kind of being, I mean, it's not exactly a superhero film, it's a supervillain film, isn't it? Joker. But I think that's the place it's got to go. That's where these films have got to go. And for me, Deadpool is part of that alternate, preferable route for superheroes to go, I think, and superhero films. I think Deadpool takes us into unpredictable and rude and rule-breaking adult waters. And I like that. So what have we got here? We've got Ryan Reynolds. We've got Hugh Jackman as Wolverine being brought back in. We've got a whole host of cameos in this. We've also got Emma Corrin is kind of like a key character. Who you'll know from things like The Crown. Emma Corrin plays the arch villain in this. I think the relative of, sister of, certainly looks like, is it Xavier, whatever his name is, from the X-Men. You've got Chris Evans, has quite a souped-up role in this. And you've also got Matthew Macfadyen, obviously from Succession, who I love. But I have to say, I love, but slightly went not off him, but thought, what kind of a person does go to the Garrick Club? So what's the premise? So the premise here is, well, I hate to say it, I think the premise of this film is what kind of was the initial thing that frustrated me with this film. I've said it many times, I'm not a fan of multiverses. I'm not a fan of the whole jumping out of timelines. Not a fan of it. And that's not to say that this film doesn't play with the whole kind of timeline, multiverse type thing in a very comedic fashion. It does. But I tell you what I got slightly frustrated by quite early on in this film was the fact that it did ask us to get on board with, and I guess part of the reason for this is because this is the only Marvel film of the year. It's under some pressure to do some of the heavy lifting to repair the Marvel brand. And I'll try and unpack that a little bit more later in this review. So let's just go with the beginning. The beginning of this film is absolutely sensational. The first 5 to 10 minutes, the first action moment, the action scene where essentially Deadpool has headed off. He's digging up Wolverine's body, basically. And, basically the whole front of this film is a kind of search for various iterations of Wolverine across different kind of timelines, because Wolverine's timeline, or I can't remember someone's timeline's been erased. And basically Wolverine is critical to saving the timeline. I think saving Deadpool's timeline. But anyway, the film starts with Deadpool scrabbling around at a grave from Logan, the Logan grave of Wolverine, dead. And he finds the body, he finds the remains. And this for me was a great start, because what kicks in is the most wondrously bloody. But when I say bloody, it's bloody in that The Boys fashion, where it's curious. We've reached this kind of weird moment where films are managing to be incredibly bloody, incredibly violent, with a kind of squelch and blood factor that's kind of so comedic in its sort of not real blood, but looks so like blood. Think Tarantino. I don't think it elicits like strong certificates from the censors. It's really weird. So it's incredibly violent, incredibly well choreographed, incredibly innovative, incredibly just funny. I mean, the ways in which he kills people, shoots people. He was kind of using jawbones, and he was using femurs, and he was using wibbly wobbly legs to kind of take people's heads off. It was astonishing. And he was like jabbing people and shooting them in their balls, in their scrotums, up their bottoms. It clearly set the tone. And I have to say, it's very hard to kind of unpack each of the moments in that fight scene. But I was laughing. I can't remember a fight scene where I've laughed out loud. It was funny. And all of that was down to, though I'm not entirely convinced Ryan Reynolds was actually in the suit for most of the choreographed dance sequences, it was a sensational start. It was a really sensational start. This is a film that's incredibly meta. This is a film about not just Deadpool and other Deadpool films. It's a film about 20th Century Fox once owning Deadpool and certain iterations of Marvel kind of characters, and Disney now owning them. There are many gags in this about certain characters who didn't cut the grade. For example, I was missing kind of, Josh Brolin and all of that lot. I missed all those other characters. There's Zazie Beetz as well in Deadpool 2. And he said, a kind of focus group sort of told us that they weren't very good. There's lots of kind of in-jokes, lots of kind of, clever, witty, sort of Hollywoody, but superior jokes. And I think I got a lot of them, but I didn't get all of them. And if I had one worry for this film, it's very in. The jokes are very in, but they're very in on a sort of very in-type sort of superhero Marvel, DC type in-joke. And they come thick and fast, right down to even the casting of Channing Tatum in his cameo as Gambit. They're all riffing on a lot of off-camera, behind-the-scenes kind of executive decision-making that's been happening around various films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Jon Favreau's there as, is it Happy Hogan? Is that his name? Neat. Deadpool wants to become an Avenger. You get a sense of his ambition. He wants to leave a lasting legacy. He wants to matter. I love that. He just wants to matter. And then I don't even unpack the kind of complexities of, he then sort of has to go on a hunt, and then he gets kidnapped by the Time Variance Authority. Mr. Paradox, he gets taken to Mr. Paradox. Now, Mr. Paradox is Matthew Macfadyen. Matthew Macfadyen in this is essentially like a Hollywood exec. He's kind of the one who's kind of pulling Deadpool in. He's going to use Deadpool. He's going to charm him. He's going to promise him sort of, in a sense, fame and legacy and the chance to matter. He's going to say to him that you're actually more important than the actual Avengers, even though Deadpool has wanted to be an Avenger. And then he's going to send him off on a mission to essentially find the right Wolverine to then take on along the multiverse and into the timelines to sort out the timeline fucking fuck up, basically. I got disappointed by this. I felt we got caught. The film quite quickly got bogged down, even though it was riffing, joking, funny. Ryan Reynolds, every word that comes out of his mouth is very funny. He is funny. Ryan Reynolds is seriously good. I can watch him just read a menu. He's one of those. And if you think about it, quite amazing when you think so much of his comedy and his performance happens behind a mask. Maddie's often said this. It's amazing how much Ryan Reynolds you get for not seeing Ryan Reynolds. It's quite astonishing. And so it's neat, but I felt myself really hampered, which happens with nearly every Marvel film I've seen in recent years, with trying to work out the logistics. And I didn't want to work out the logistics. I don't mind working out plot. I don't mind working out what's happening to who. I don't mind working out character arcs that surprise you. But when you're having to literally work out which timeline and who's saying I find all that quite tedious. For example, we jump across all these timelines and we find so many different versions of Wolverine. We find a tiny, teeny, tiddly Wolverine. He's so funny, and he's clearly digitally sort of unenhanced, if you like. He finds another one who's kind of like nailed to a cross. And I think a lot of these kind of iterations of Wolverine were kind of riffs and references to many of the comics. The one thing about Wolverine, not Hugh Jackman, I like Hugh Jackman, but the one thing about Wolverine that's always held me back is this stupid little two sort of hair things. I mean, I know they're meant to be camp, but they're too camp. And I felt they could have had a bit more fun with his hair in this. And so we've had we've had the opening, really good action sequence. We've had nice little scenes with Deadpool and his usual kind of, his blind friend, landlady. Nice little lines there. Unfortunately, the best lines from her are all in the trailer, so there were no surprises there. That was kind of the best was there. Even when he gets sort of interrupted at his birthday party, best lines are there, pegging, all that kind of stuff. It suffered a little bit for us having had, almost all of the best sort of lines from those scenes that weren't hooked into the whole multiverse kind of navigating the sort of journey of the story stuff, all the kind of incidental stuff, which for me with Deadpool, it's all the incidental stuff that I think is really entertaining. I like all the stuff, all the kind of buddy chat. I like all the exchanges between each other. I like the observations. I like the banter. I like all the banter. And so then they get sent off. So so he finds the right Wolverine. He's a soak. He's a drunk. He's a kind of, he's washed up. There's Hugh Jackman. It's lovely to see Hugh Jackman. And there's something incredibly comforting and reassuring about Wolverine, even though he can, these nails can kind of come out and all that kind of stuff. He's incredibly physical. But there's a weird thing, and I think this film really plays to and is actively trying to play to Hugh Jackman's Wolverine being very sort of dour and quite serious. And really what I think they were going for was that he's still a hangover, obviously, from a different era of superheroes. This is something I think they could have maybe pressed the comedic point of a little bit more, because all I think that ended up happening was that Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, yes, he's the kind of straight man to Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool throughout, but he's a bit too straight and he's a bit too serious. And yes, he's very good at looking sort of perplexed and astonished at some of the choices and things that Deadpool makes and some of his actions. But I felt there was just a chink missing. I felt there needed to be another little layer of self-awareness or humour in Wolverine. There's one moment, for example, when I think they land in the void and they have this massive fight, again, a lot of it in the trailer, in this sort of barren tundra where there's a kind of edifice of a broken down sort of sculptural sort of monument that says 20th Century Fox. Again, another gag to the fact that 20th Century Fox has lost them all, if you like, these characters to Disney. I think at this point, they're pushing home that sort of note was a bit too much now. We got it. We've got the idea that Deadpool was over there and now it's over here and Disney's got you. And we got the point which Ryan Reynolds says 3 times, which is very funny. Hugh Jackman, be careful because Disney are going to make you do this now until you're 90. I thought that was quite fun, the idea that, you're going to be rinsed as a kind of intellectual property and all that kind of stuff. So they have this huge fight in the void. We've seen a lot of it in the trailer. And a real problem crept in for me with the two of them, because there are 2 really long, prolonged action scenes where Wolverine and Deadpool effectively fight each other and hurt each other a lot. And of course they can't and don't kill each other because they can't die in the conventional sense of the term. Now, I'm not au fait with all the different superheroes and how they can die and whether they're immortal and what needs to happen in order for them to die. I get it. I get they've got superpowers and I get that they're hard to kill. But I've always felt that they all should be able to be killed. Something kicked in with even their sort of buddy movie bro kind of fight, Wolverine repeatedly sticking his claws into Deadpool repeatedly shooting Wolverine here, there and everywhere and knifing him in the neck. They can't kill each other and they don't kill each other. So these scenes, although they're kind of fun-ish, I think they needed a bit more dialogue in them, or cleverer dialogue cut in with the action, because the action ends up kind of becoming quite sort of numb and neutered, because you're thinking, well, there's no real danger here whatsoever. This is literally scrapping. Now, I think that's the point. But there are 2 prolonged, extended scenes. I think either you lose the first one, because the second one that happens, I think, in a Honda Civic or in a Honda car is very funny and has a very funny ending, and it's got neat use of soundtrack. But this first one, I thought, there's a surplus to requirements. Then we come across Emma Corrin, who's the kind of villain. Emma Corrin is Cassandra Nova, who's the twin sister of Charles Xavier from the X-Men. Emma Corrin, I've never been entirely convinced by Emma Corrin, and I have to say again, for the arch villain of this piece, albeit that Matthew Macfadyen too is also a villain in a suit, Emma Corrin didn't cut it for me. Emma Corrin had a fantastic line when, under duress and in a moment of vulnerability, she says she likes to flick her bean whilst listening to Enya. Like, an unforgettable line that got an enormous roar of laughter from the cinema. It's just quite a shocking image and a really quite shocking choice of music. And that's where this film's at its best. It's at its best in its one-liners. And as a film, it is a string of one-liners, but I would have to say that actually, because the one-liners are so good, you find yourself, or I found myself, a little bit irritated by the exposition and the multiverse story and having to go back and make sense of where we were and what we were doing and all this kind of stuff. I didn't need it. And so this film is cameo heavy. It's got cameo after cameo. One of the first big cameos in there is we get Chris Evans. I think, oh God, so what's Captain America doing here? Because we've seen Cap earlier in a clip, but no, he's here as the Human Torch. Of course he is. He's mouthy, he's funny. He is funny. I do like the fact that we're seeing Chris Evans do a lot more comedy. He comes to a grisly end because Ryan Reynolds essentially throws him under the bus with Emma Corrin. Emma Corrin has all these hoodlums, and I'm sure that in amongst Emma Corrin's kind of baddies group in this void, you kind of wonder why she's there. The void feels like a sort of trash compactor place where people are sort of thrown. And you sort of think, well, who would settle for this place? There's some really funny riffing on whether we're in Mad Max, but then that would be a crossing of franchises and all that. You see, it's very in. If you like those cross-referential kind of gags about films, franchises, intellectual properties, studios, brilliant. But they come so fast. You've really got to have your rule book of, oh God, yeah, no, I remember that. I mean, fortunately, we were doing the weekly rushes a lot last year, so I knew a lot of the references to a lot of the superhero films that were and weren't being made. But my God, they come fast and furious. We then come across a little unlikely band of characters. Wesley Snipes as Blade. And interestingly, again, having to talk in shop here, he throws down some really strong gauntlets about how he's Blade. Because, of course, there's the Mahershala Ali film that's been in development and has stopped and hasn't kicked off again. And Wesley Snipes says there's only one Blade. We have Jennifer Garner. Who else do we have? Jennifer Garner is back as Elektra. She first suited up as Elektra in 2003's Daredevil. Do you remember that? We've got Channing Tatum as Gambit. Now, Gambit was a film that was going to be made. Gambit is a comic that whenever I used to see Gambit in the shop, I'd go, that looks shit. What's his superpower? Cards. Cards. Anyway, he has this most ridiculous French accent. And it's very funny because you can't understand the word he's saying. And in amongst everything, you're like, I can't hear you. What are you saying? And Ryan Reynolds constantly pulls him down for his shit voice. Channing Tatum is brilliant at comedy. I just don't, cards. He's kind of shuffling cards and throwing. I'm sorry, I can't get on board with cards as a means to kind of kill people. Although Emma Corrin as a villain didn't really cut the mustard for me. Is that the right phrase? She didn't kind of do it for me. She didn't float my boat. So Cassandra has this remarkable thing, and I thought this was a really neat detail. This was like one of the most truly horrific moments in the film where she would put her hands into someone's head. She would like put it through their mouth or through the back of the head, and so you would see the finger marks under the skin. And this happens rather viciously and rather brilliantly and viscerally to Matthew Macfadyen at one point. And her fingers come out of the eyes, and she feels around in your brain. You know when you feel like someone's manipulating your brain. You know, it's literally. And they kind of got. I think they got a little bit carried away with the effect because it's so good. I mean, when you see those fingers under the skin, it's real. And when you see the fingers coming out of the eyes and out of the ears, it's like, oh, it's excellent. It's really, really neat. And so that was quite a nice kind of extra thing that you kind of thought, well, at least when we see Cassandra or whenever Emma Corrin's on screen, we might get a bit of that kind of face fiddling or brain fiddling. I mean, Christ almighty, imagine being able to fiddle with your brain. Lots and lots of lewd jokes about stuffing things in all the wrong orifices, sticking things up holes, sticking things in eyes, you know, pegging. En route, they meet Nicepool, who is another iteration of Deadpool. This is Ryan Reynolds without the scarred face, with long flowy hair. He looked a little bit like he was like the Joe Wicks. He was like the Joe Wicks Deadpool. And of course, he has Dogpool, which is the ugliest dog in the world, Peggy the Pooch. Again, even that, I thought it was neat. And there were some sort of protracted scenes where sort of just normal dialogues going on, exposition, what have you. And Peggy, the Dogpool's tongue, which is genuinely long, though they must have exaggerated a bit, is literally working its way in Ryan Reynolds' mouth, a bit like Emma Corrin's fingers are in people's heads. Neat, nice, liked it. But again, I thought that could have been funnier. Some long shots of like Dogpool just kind of leaping up to Ryan Reynolds. I thought that I was waiting for a more ironic moment. What we discover about Nicepool, which is a nice version of Deadpool, is he's not immortal. And so there's a very funny moment when all these Deadpools, and there is a moment later where Emma Corrin's character, they create the sort of, what do you call it, the Deadpool dead, if you like. It's just millions of different iterations of Deadpool all coming to kill Wolverine and our Deadpool. And then our Deadpool uses Nicepool as kind of body cover to get shot to kind of protect him because he knows that Nicepool can die. I wasn't convinced by all of this. I found the army of Deadpools unbelievable. I mean, yes, it was a nice riff on the idea that this is kind of, if you go to cosplay, you know, if you go to any of the sort of Comic Cons or anything like that, you get lots of different Deadpools, don't you? And he had a whole heap of different Deadpools led by Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds' wife, with the kind of long blonde bit. And then they go into a long fight, which is a kind of left to right, slow, obviously digitally and CGI created tracking shot of Wolverine and Deadpool chopping through, slicing through everyone and coming out at the end. I was demanding and really desired more droll, deadpan, sort of straight man comedy from Wolverine. I didn't get as much of that as I thought I was going to get. Yes, it was striving for buddiness. I don't know whether that's because Hugh Jackman can't quite reach to that sort of whip smart kind of comedy, but even in his sort of lumpish kind of treading. I mean, for example, the funniest moment with Hugh Jackman was the moment when all these Deadpools are shooting them and they look like they're going to die. He picks up Dogpool, the ugly dog with the long tongue, and just walks very matter-of-factly in front of where he could easily be shot and uses it as basically a dog shield or a human shield. That was his funniest moment. I think every other moment in it, he was very serious. And I know he's meant to be serious before anyone says, I know Logan, I know he's a very serious character and all that. But you can still do serious. I think his seriousness could have been presented more comedically. So in a weird way, I tell you what I think began to happen for me in this film. Whilst Ryan Reynolds was doing everything right, all the stuff that we want to get, I was getting all the right stuff, a little part of me wondered whether Ryan Reynolds, in the making of this film, found Hugh Jackman a little bit more serious than even he'd catered for. And so I found Ryan Reynolds and Deadpool having to work almost overtime to kind of work against this very sort of glacial, static block of Hugh. I mean, for me, the moments in this film that stand out are the moments where, Ryan Reynolds just delivers some corkers of lines. But most of them, I hate to say it, a lot of them are already in the trailer. So even his kind of, am I Marvel Jesus? Am I the Messiah? Very funny, very witty. That stands out as a moment. Yes, there's a moment where could Wolverine and Deadpool, as they're saving the world and rescuing the timelines and trying to beat Emma Corrin's Cassandra, could they die? Might they die? They're on the underground. There's a huge hadron collider thing. There's fucking electrons going everywhere. Why does there have to always be electrons? Why are we always rescuing timelines? Why have we got this woman from some other film that I've seen somewhere in a suit who's also the one who's in charge of all the timelines? I don't care about timelines and multiverses and all that bollocks. That was really annoying. There's a lot in this to like. It was a bit too long. It was a bit too, even for me, I like in-jokes. I like riffing on Hollywood. I like riffing on the kind of, the in jokes and all that kind of stuff, but I just worry that there maybe were too many here. And it's interesting when you look at the kind of Rotten Tomatoes scores for each of the Deadpools, they're kind of high-ish, 85 I think for the first, 80 something for the second. This is just no 80. Anyway, they're going down incrementally, and I think that's right. I do worry that potentially what we have here is not end of Deadpool, but I think we really need to shift focus for Deadpool. I think he maybe needs to sit in alongside a load of other characters. I felt again that this film, as I said right at the beginning, was trying to be a Deadpool film, was trying to pay reference, deference and respect to an older era of superhero, which, to be honest with you, I wasn't on board with back then. Interestingly, my girls were much more the old X-Men movies, the old Hulk, all those older films. They never did it for me. They never did it for me, the X-Men films. I always felt there was something, I don't know, they're a bit too garish and a bit too camp, maybe, I don't know. I like a bit of believability or rawness. And there's rawness to Deadpool. Anyway, so I felt this was kind of, yes, it was kind of like it was idolatory of an old type of superhero film. That was, again, Hugh Jackman's there for that. It was trying to be a Deadpool film, and it had a lot of those qualities, and I would say possibly its greatest moment for that, concentrated, that you haven't seen in the trailers right at the beginning. But there are moments all the way through it, you can't lie. I mean, Ryan Reynolds just trots them out all the time, but they become less and less frequent, and it becomes less and less irreverent, in a sense, as we clamber towards the end of the film. And then I just began to really feel that actually, yes, Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel, has allowed this film to be as rude and risque and sort of deprecating as he has, but on one proviso. And this proviso, unfortunately, I felt the weight of this proviso throughout, increasingly towards the end. This film is trying to, in its own way, rehabilitate and get us prepped for a whole heap of other content. Marvel's trying to course correct, and I think they chose the wrong film, or it just so happens that because this is the only film that was coming out at this time, this is the wrong film to do that with, and so it fell short of being the Deadpool film I was hoping it would be, and it was striving, frustratingly, to be almost some of those things that the Marvel films have become that I certainly don't like, which is obsessed with timelines and pointing forward and pointing back and all that kind of stuff. In jokes, lots of actors having fun. You've got lots of actors in here having fun. I wish Emma Corrin had had more fun. I feel that they could have relished that part a bit more. But I tell you what, Emma Corrin's kind of fingers in someone's head, fingering other people's heads, is great. And her line, their line about, flicking the bean to Enya, for me is absolutely priceless. What would I score it? I wouldn't. It's hard to say. I don't think I'd say to everyone, go and see it, because there's not enough at the cinema now that's kind of like intelligently entertaining. It's an intelligent film. It's an intelligent film about cinema, and it's an intelligent film about superheroes. But it's also a canny operation by Marvel. But you've got Ryan Reynolds in it. So what would I give it? I'd give it 78. 78.